In our last video, we talked about the theory behind narratives and framing. Today, I'll be talking about switching on helpful ways of talking and thinking. So, to switch on helpful ways, we need to first understand the dominant ways people talk and think about it now. And only then can we intentionally choose our frames to strengthen the narratives that help people think and talk differently. So you can see in this illustration, we need to understand where the unhelpful is so we can direct people down a better path. So these are the most common unhelpful ways of thinking about homes and housing. And these might be quite familiar to you. So the first one is fatalism. And that's the idea that the problem is too big, too hard, or that those with the power to act can't or won't. Otherism, and sometimes this is known as us versus them, is where we pit people against each other. More for you means less for me. Individualism is the idea that our experiences and outcomes are based purely on our individual choices, effort, and hard work alone. And money is the reason, and the answer is the idea that either making money will fix the problems, or that the lack of money or the cost is itself the problem. So let's see how some of these examples play out. This is an example from Bernard Hickey. Now, Bernard's a friend of the workshop, and his intention in this article was to express anger at the injustice between generations. And if you read the whole article, you'll see that come out. But if you think about that headline and the framing that headline has of how hope for a generation was lost, how does that make you feel? It doesn't make you feel like you can take action. It doesn't make you feel like you have power to create change. And this is when people disengage. They decide that it's too big, too hard, why bother? Otherism, or us versus them, we see this a lot in transport, and it's quite helpful sometimes to see the narratives in a different area of work because it makes them stand out just a little bit more. So this is when you have one against the other, and we see this all the time with renters and landlords, even in the words that we use to describe the roles they play. But we also see it come up, and particularly recently, in a generational us versus them. So more for mum and dad or boomers means less for the younger generation. And what these us versus them narratives do is they make it really hard to see the system that's behind what's happening, but also it makes it hard to see how we can work together to find those solutions. And those are the things we know will help make the biggest changes in the long term. Individualism. This one is in every area of work we've ever worked in. It's the idea that it's all about us, our individual effort and choice, and we make our own destiny. So in these examples, you're probably very familiar with the avocado on toast metric of how to afford a new home for first home owners. But we also see it in meritocracy, so that the people that succeed are because they worked hard, they tried, and they were exceptional. These pop up all the time, and it positions people as consumers over citizens. It renders the system invisible. It makes collective action seem unnecessary or pointless. And it points our thinking to that individual choice as the entire problem, as well as the entire solution. And the last one I have is around money as the answer. Now, I've got two slightly different examples here with slightly different versions of the narrative. One is telling us that the cost of cold, damp homes is too high. And what that's doing is presenting a social problem as a financial problem, that it's the cost that's the problem, not the fact that children are getting sick. And the other one tells us that our motive for fighting climate change is financial, and that the best way of doing this is through individual consumption choices. So there's a little bit of that individualism wound through in that one too. And one of the biggest things that we're coming across in the research we're doing right at the moment is the idea that a home is an asset. And this spills into everything. It spills into health standards, housing supply, attitudes between tenants and landlords, and even the prioritization of housing as a social good. So this financial framing makes it really hard to see all the other very important roles that homes have in our lives. So if those are the most common unhelpful ways of thinking, then we know that we've got some helpful things that we can switch to. And the helpful ones will help build understanding and support. The first one is we can redesign systems. This is a really important way of framing that shifts thinking away from individualism and also fatalism. The way our housing system works now was designed by people, and so it can be redesigned by people to work better. Strengths-based, this is a really common narrative, and it works beautifully when paired with the systems narrative. We know we have the knowledge, skills, capabilities, technology to make our homes work better for all people. And the last one, bigger than us, which is sometimes also called public good. This reminds us that homes have a bigger purpose. They're a public good. They're a foundation for our health and well-being. So these are some of the helpful narratives that we can switch to that will overcome the unhelpful ways of thinking that the unhelpful narratives show. So here's a transport example. This is from Thomas Nash, who's a local body politician here in Wellington, and he's drawing on a systems narrative. And in the story, he highlights that the people with more power need to provide options in order for people to be able to change and ride their bike. So this narrative redirects people thinking about individualism, people choosing to walk or ride, and directs it to the people who have the power, who can create the options for people to be able to ride or walk. And it focuses on that power dynamic quite clearly. Strengths-based, this is an example that's from the Māori response to COVID-19. I could have had 15 examples with a very similar theme, many based in Te Ao Māori. And the strengths work together to be responsive, to be creative, and enable Te Ao Māori to adapt and protect their people in this unprecedented time. And here's an example that I pulled off LinkedIn, actually, and my colleague Manette found it for us. And it's a strengths-based narrative, and it's talking about a community organisation that has done their work. They have what they need to make a better option for housing their people. So we can see that these can be threaded through many of the stories and reflect much of the work that you guys are doing. And the last one is better than us or public good. This one's focused much more on the outcome of collective action. And we tend to talk about the planet and the public and common good. This example was from our crime and justice work, and it was done with Action Station and an artist, the Māori Mermaid. And it involved people who had experienced violence at the hands of police, telling us what a better world would be, what the outcome would be, and using the Safer Communities Together tagline to quite good creative effect. In the housing context, this is a LinkedIn post that I pulled from the Child Poverty Action Group. And here what they've done is they've done a really good job of explaining or describing the public good that a home brings. So a secure home is somewhere where you can measure how tall your children grow, where you can tend the garden, where you can share kai with your family. Everyone in Aotearoa should be able to feel secure in the place they call home. So you can see that they're talking about the outcome, not just the thing that they need as the tool to get that. This is another way that you can express this, and this is from the messaging guide. When our homes are healthy, warm and dry and comfortable, we can live full lives and give back to our communities. So that's an example of the helpful narratives and how they sound in the real world. And then in the last few minutes, I'm going to talk about the different shifts we can make. So what can we do that we can start using these helpful narratives and put it into our communications? So these are practical tactics, the things that we can do. And I'm only going to talk about 3 of our shifts. If you've done our training or if you follow our work, we have more shifts. But these are the ones that I thought were most important for you in an introduction session. The first one is shift to your narrative. The second one is lead with values. And the last one is shift to explaining. Now, shifting to our narrative is the first and most important shift. And it's really important because if we are telling our story, if we are leading with our helpful narrative, we are helping people see the vision that we're working towards. At the same time, we're not talking into the unhelpful narratives. And it is so easy, as a professional communicator for many, many years, it is so easy to slide into talking in the narrative of the unhelpful, opposed people. So when we focus on our own narrative, the story we want to tell, we avoid doing that. And what's really important about the psychology of framing and the way our brains work is if we do talk into that unhelpful narrative, what it does is it repeats, and repetition makes it more memorable and more dominant. So even if our intention is to correct something that is out there that's incorrect or negate, having a fact off actually strengthens the unhelpful narrative, and it certainly doesn't win hearts and minds either. So sticking to your narrative and standing strongly in that place is a really important place to start when you're using narrative and framing as a tool. The next few slides are about values. Values are our deep motivation, our why for life, and there are particular values that we can highlight and share in our communications that will help people connect to your issue and remind them of why they care. So the first one is about care. So we know people care about other people, and we know that people care that they're looked after, and homes are one way that we can look after the people that are important to us. So in your comms, try using the value of care. Another one that's really important and helpful at the moment, particularly where many things are financialized, is instead talking about what's responsible, wise, and practical. So drawing on the practical steps that people in government can make to make having a decent home a place to be is a really strong values-led way that will work in the current environment that we find ourselves in. And the last one is getting everyone what they need to thrive. Now, this is a different way of talking about equity, and we know that equity is a tricky term. It's one that's not well understood by many people, and it can mean different things to different people. So instead, talking about everybody getting what they need to thrive, or what's fair and just is another way of doing this, just works better so that people understand exactly what it is that you're trying to raise. And it's important to always contextualize what fairness is. So it's not fair that they got that and I get this. It's fair that this is what people deserve. It's the justice element of fairness. You can also highlight that people need different things because of their context. So it doesn't mean the same solution, but it means everyone having access to the same outcomes. And the last thing I'm going to think about, share with you, is giving people a clear explanation. Now, it will astound you how many times we describe a problem, but don't actually explain how the problem happened, what was the impact, who made it happen, or what works better. So spending some time developing a really clear explanation is absolutely critical for people to connect with your story and then understand why you're making the recommendations you are. So in our work and in the other resources that you'll have access to, there's more information. But the takeaway for today is shift from describing the problem to explaining how the problem came and what works better.